Hello there my dear friends, and welcome back to another Star Wars video. It is I coming at you once again, your favourite galactic hostess, Star Wars Meg. And today, we're going to be talking about something which honestly is overdue. Droids. In the Star Wars galaxy, you can't avoid them. Whether you're a grunt worker on some obscure moon, or you're part of Coruscant's bourgeoisie, droids are everywhere. They're comic relief, they're pilots, bartenders, assassins, and soldiers. And even the two most iconic droids who've become synonymous with the Star Wars brand, some consider R2-D2 and 3PO the storytellers of Star Wars. Well, at least R2-D2 is, because, as we know from the end of Revenge of the Sith, 3PO had his mind wiped. But nonetheless, droids clean up after our heroes and fight wars they didn't start. They can be dangerous, they can be quirky, they can have funny personalities, but across the board, they are seen as serving a purpose. They are seen as programmed and subordinate to organics. And while in some cases they are nothing more than companions, this perception of them is the problem. Because the more you consider the functionality of droids, the more unsettling the concept of them becomes. Because they aren't mere robots. Many of them exhibit sentience, and this alone renders their existence very disturbing and very creepy. Because the galaxy, for the most part, doesn't treat them like people. They joke, they scream, they feel fear, they feel pain, some of them dream of freedom, others of revenge. But they're treated as mere objects. And it's interesting because we do see these same ethical considerations levied towards the clones. Whether you're talking about clone uprisings, representation in the Senate, the question of the humanity of clones is something that's come up in both canon and legends. And in the Clone Wars, the clone army of the Republic themselves perceive droids as lesser than them. But there aren't too many examples of droid rebellions. In the expanded universe, there were a few. There's a famous one during the Old Republic, and even the bounty hunter droid IG-88 was going to start one before it was stopped. But most of the galaxy cannot see past their metal exterior. They're treated like property, with the exception of Anakin Skywalker, who built C-3PO and treated R2-D2 like a human being. As George Lucas once said, the only discrimination that exists in the Star Wars universe is against droids. And we literally see that on full display in the original movie, when Wuha, the Mos Eisley Cantina bartender, enforces the no droid policy. And this anti-droid sentiment is on full display with many other characters. In The Mandalorian, Din Djarin notoriously despised droids. At least in this instance, his prejudice is kind of warranted, but it was thanks to the allyship of R5-D4 that Din's view on droids has slowly begun to change. And here's the thing, holding hostility towards droids would in theory be fine if they were nothing more than machines. But it's their sentience that makes the ethics surrounding their existence and treatment way more complex. It's the best time to discuss these philosophical considerations. There are currently so many debates about the nature and limitations of artificial intelligence. How far is it going to go? And this can lead to conversations about the nature of personhood, digital rights, even consciousness, and I guess what it means to be a complex circuit that functions like a brain but isn't organic. And so bringing it back to droids, you begin to understand the parallels. This isn't just about robots that can talk, it's about morality. What it means to own a being that has the potential to suffer and have personhood, even though they're made of metal. Buried beneath the beeps, the banter, and the slapstick, there is consciousness, sometimes bound in chains. Because once you start asking how much a droid can feel, the real question becomes, how much cruelty is being ignored in the name of convenience, in the name of servitude? I would argue the most disturbing encounter with droid sentience in the movies comes in Return of the Jedi, when we see a gong droid being tortured at Jabba's palace, and it's screaming out in pain. I will never forget the first time I saw it. Droids do have pain receptors as a safety mechanism, and some droids, like the ATM-2, are programmed to have a fear of consequence. But outside of the films, the best explanation for droid sentience comes in the book New Jedi Order Enemy Lines 2, an expanded universe classic, and it's when C-3PO meets Lando's bodyguard droid, and it goes like this. Greetings, I am C-3PO. YVH-11A, the other droid replied. Assigned as soldier and bodyguard to Lando Calrissian, currently on miscellaneous duty, investigating anomalies. You are an anomaly. What is a protocol droid doing monitoring the repair efforts of Han Solo? And 3PO replies, I'm not even paying attention to the repairs. In an effort to improve my language skills, I'm struggling to determine the best word to describe the descent and extinguishment of the sparks from the repair process. Well, that should be no problem for a protocol droid, 11A replies. It shouldn't be, but it is, because the word that seems most apt is not the logical one. And what word is that? And 3PO replies, sad. Sad? You are correct, that word is not appropriate. But it is most appropriate. Each spark seems somehow symbolic of life, glowing brightly as it traverses a course, then disappearing. Does it leave anything behind? Well, I must say, if it strikes a flammable substance, then it will leave something behind. Do you think, in the final nanoseconds, a spark feels fear, knowing its duration is at an end? I doubt it. I most sincerely doubt it. A spark is incapable of feeling fear, or indeed, even of considering its own mortality, and the same is also said of droids. But in some cases, it's not true. C-3PO hesitated, and then said, if I may say, that is a most insightful statement coming from a combat droid. And then, 11A responds, I face extinguishment regularly. This has given me many opportunities for reflection. I've recently been unable to ignore this consideration. I suspect these calculations have even begun to affect my own work. Pensively, C-3PO says, me too. I've had to face these thoughts recently. Most unsettling to be sure, and my counterpart, R2-D2, is no help whatsoever on this front. Everything terminates, he says. Face it bravely. I suppose that's an adequate philosophy for some, maybe for an astromech, but I find it inadequate. I've often pondered if I were the only droid in existence capable of worrying as much as I do. It's most refreshing to discover that I'm not alone. Well, next time you ponder, 11A says, if you come to any conclusions, will you communicate them to me? I would be delighted, 3PO concludes. And I have to say, my friends, this has to be one of 3PO's most insightful, profound moments. And interestingly enough, The Rise of Skywalker touches upon this. 3PO afraid to have his mind wiped because they need to unlock the secret language of the Sith. And the way he looks over at our heroes and says, I'm taking one last look at my friends. For all intents and purposes, many droids do possess personhood, and this is consistent with other EU books, which seem to maintain several times that droids are mind-wiped to prevent excessive growth. It is possible that droids might develop sentience if they're programmed to recognize patterns from people such as their owners, opponents, and so on. That might be the reason why droids like R2 begin to develop a personality, as they learn preferences of their owners and anticipate their needs. And in the case of protocol droids, because they have to be effective translators, to me makes sense that they have to develop emotions, or at least understand them. Developing their own personality might be a logical next step as they advance. And finally, my dear friends, one more consideration in this conversation about the ethics of droid existence. I want to touch upon droid theology. Oh yes, droid theology. I'm not joking. In A New Hope, when 3PO is lowered into his oil bath, he exclaims, "Thank the Maker." Now this might have been intended as a comedic musing by George Lucas, but the expanded universe took this further. Numerous droids around the galaxy, unrelated to one another, started praising a maker, and it was a mysterious deity invented by droids, and it seemed curious that they would possess knowledge of one, which led to two conclusions. Old droids who never had their memory wiped told new droids about it, creating a theological oral tradition. And the other theory is that droid manufacturers included knowledge of the Maker in their programming to make them easier to control. And the Maker, the concept of this deity, originates with the humanoid species of the Sunezi. And it does prove that droids have a concept of something beyond themselves.